You just
Here.
go to
Okay,
share.
I got it. I got it.
Yeah. You have to share with us. We don't see it yet. Okay.
Are you
Yes.
seeing now?
Yeah, it's coming. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Now?
Yeah. Now
Yes.
you go to the presentation mode.
Wine glass. Wine glass at the bottom right.
Bottom right is
Yeah,
the
right there.
Yeah,
Go down,
that's
a little bit down,
Go
down.
Right,
Left.
right.
Yeah, right there. Up,
Up.
little up,
One line up.
left, left.
Next.
Yeah, that one.
Sorry.
No, other
No,
side.
right.
Next. That one. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Got it?
Yeah.
Okay. It's blocking a little bit on the right side, but I hope that's
No,
okay.
it's fine. It's fine. We are
Okay.
getting clear.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you,
morning,
CK.
and
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Thank you, CK. Welcome. Start.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm CK Manjunath, professor, the great Professor GP's student. I got my PhD under him. Thank you again, Professor GP, for guiding me.
Nice.
So, again, good morning, everyone, and good evening to audience from India. I'm going to talk about Ecuador, which has been a scientist's dream destination for the last 287 years. The reason is very simple. I summed it up as ego. Ego stands for E is equator, G is Galapagos Islands, and O is rare orchids. So I made 2 trips to Ecuador, and this was in 2019. On my first trip, I went there looking for a rare orchid that only grows in the Andes Mountains. So I was like Hanuman looking for Sanjeevani plant. I didn't know what I was going to find. And I used that analogy very deliberately because this orchid I was looking for, the botanical name is Dracula species, and the common name is monkey face orchid. It is very, very rare. So here is the history of scientific expeditions to Ecuador. It started in 1736 when Ecuador was still a Spanish colony. It was called the territory of Quito. Quito, of course, is the original native name of the country. And there was an expedition of French physicists and astronomers led by La Condamine, and they were studying the equator and measuring the circumference and the radius of Earth. So I have given a link, and I would encourage everyone to read it, because a lot of the things we take for granted today, like even elementary school children know that Earth is a sphere. But how did that concept finally arrive? It is because of the hard work of these scientists. They put their own lives at risk, and with a lot of dedication, they made measurements under very difficult conditions to arrive at those conclusions. And now we take it for granted. We take the meter, the length of the meter for granted, the pendulum, and we make all these things, we can download from the internet. But it was the hard work of our fellow scientists in those trying days that established these facts. So it is an honor to mention these names. 1831, we know very well as biologists, Charles Darwin from UK. He traveled to Galapagos, spent 5 years there to study evolution of species. Galapagos is part of Ecuador. 1872, this is what I was interested in. Heinrich Reichenbach from Hamburg, Germany. He described first member of an orchid family, which has now come to be known as Draculas. These grow only in the high altitudes in the Andes Mountains. And this is the plant I went looking for. Now, where is Ecuador? Here is the equator line that runs right through. And this small country here on the Pacific coast is Ecuador. So as you can see, it is very close from US. It only takes about 7 hours to reach by flight. And also English is spoken pretty much by everyone in Ecuador, and the official currency is the US dollar. So it is a very convenient destination for at least American tourists. As you can see here, India is still in the northern hemisphere, so we are quite far off from the equator line. IISc is at about 13 degrees latitude. Latitude is going this way. North Pole is 90 degrees latitude. Bangalore is 13 degrees latitude. Where I am here in Dallas, it is 33 degrees. Where Rajan is, it is 53 degrees. So we are still quite a ways from the North Pole, but we are nowhere near the equator. So equator is a very interesting place. That's why a lot of people visit Ecuador. This is the geographical map of Ecuador. I hope you can all hear me okay. There are 3 regions of Ecuador. This green area is the Amazon basin. All the mountains here drain into the Amazon River. That's where most of the South American Indians live. This green area is the Pacific coast. But there is an area here, the whitish band you see here. This is known as the Avenue of Volcanoes. This is where the Pacific tectonic plate meets the Andes tectonic plate. So there are lots of volcanoes here, very tall volcanoes, which are still very active, and also a lot of earthquakes that happen here. Quito, which is right here, is the capital of Ecuador, and it is right along the equator. The official name of Ecuador is the Republic on the Equator, República del Ecuador, that is in Spanish. Right behind Quito is this mountain called Pichincha. So this is a 15,000-foot volcano, which is very active, and it is right in the backyard of Quito. So when you visit Ecuador, if you're visiting these places, you have to land here in Quito, which is the capital, and Quito is at about 9,350 feet altitude. This is the second highest altitude capital in the world. The first one is La Paz in Bolivia, which is 11,600 feet, which is about the same as Kedarnath in India.
How about Kathmandu?
Kathmandu is a valley. Kathmandu is only about 3,500 feet.
Okay.
Yeah, so Kathmandu, if you go from Kathmandu to Mount Everest, you'll get altitude sickness. So Kathmandu is about the same as Bangalore. Anyway, you land in Quito, and then you have to take a local flight to where I was headed, which is Cuenca in the south, and this is in the Ajuay province. This is where I was going to search for this orchid. I had done a little bit of research on that, and so I knew kind of where to look, but still, I'll tell you what happened. So I had a layover in Quito, so I was able to visit the important places in Quito. The 2 things that are worth visiting are, one, the equator. Second, of course, is the volcano Pichincha. So Quito has been the land of the equator and destination of scientific expeditions for almost 300 years. This is the city, the Ciudad Mitad del Mundo near Quito. This commemorates the 1736 expedition that I mentioned by French scientists. So they had to take permission from the Spanish government because this was under Spanish control. And they traveled here, stayed for about 8 years, taking all the measurements, and answering many of the questions that the scientists were asking. Because now it is easy, you can go to moon and look at Earth and you say, oh yeah, that's a nice ball, it's a sphere. But if you are going around on land, how are you going to find out what the shape of the Earth is, what's happening at the equator, and what's happening at the poles? There was even one concept that the poles were actually larger or wider in diameter than the equator. So that would make Earth more like a dumbbell than a sphere. So the French king, Louis XV, sponsored this two expeditions, one to the Arctic to take measurements, other one to Ecuador to take measurements at the equator. And that is what established the shape of the Earth. So Ciudad Mitad del Mundo is a small town, and Mitad del Mundo means middle of the earth. And they built this big monument there, which is very beautiful and very nice to walk around and look at it. And here are the people who were part of the expedition. These were physicists and astronomers. Louis Godin, La Condamine, Carlos Condamine, and Pedro Boger, and 1736 to 1744. So at that time, Ecuador, it was not even called Ecuador, it was called Territory of Quito, was not very friendly to Europeans. And the natives also had very strange customs, like they were preserving heads of dead people by shrinking them. And 1834, there's a war between Ecuador and Spain, and that was on the foothills of the Mount Pichincha, and the Ecuadorians won, and they won their independence. This is the head that has been displayed. This is a 6-year-old boy who died 300 years ago. And as was the custom, the natives preserved the head by shrinking it. So this is what the physicists were dealing with. Now, I need to mention that this place turned out to be not the exact location of the equator. That equator line is about 100 meters or about 1,000 feet away from it. So when the GPS came along, they were able to take the exact measurements, and that's where the new museum is. That's also very close to Quito. And that is this museum called Intiñan Museum. Intiñan is in the local language of Ecuadorians, and it means path of the sun. So this is an outdoor museum. It not only celebrates the equator line, which is 000 degrees latitude, but also the culture of the native people. That's where that head I showed you is displayed, and how they lived, and what kind of gods they were worshiping. All that is shown here. This is world famous. So people come from all over the world to visit this place, not just to look around, but also feel the effects of the equator. It's called the Coriolis effect, and I'm going to talk about it in a while. So this is the display of all the gods they were worshipping. And of course, here it clearly says it is by GPS 000 line. And so here I am standing at the equator. My left foot is in the southern hemisphere, right foot is in the northern hemisphere. The red line represents the 0 degree line. So if you close your eyes and walk along that red line, and if you lean to one side, you start feeling dizzy. And that is the Coriolis force. I didn't try it because it doesn't, I don't need to close my eyes and even walk. I'll feel dizzy all the time. This is the man after whom the Coriolis effect is named. He was a French scientist. So again, you realize that the French did a lot of scientific work in Ecuador, although they never owned the place. It was never a French colony. but it is still, it is an amazing piece of work. He was Gaspard Gustave Coriolis, born in 1792 and died in 1843. He was a French mathematician, mechanical engineer, and a physicist. He was working not on the equator, but he was working on energy transfers using rotating systems like water wheels. During that time, Europeans were using water wheels to grind grains and things like that. So he wanted to work out how the energy transfer occurred and what the ideal situation was, and also the formula which described the energy transfer. This is the formula he came up with. This formula looks very deceptively simple. Fc is the force Coriolis, or the Coriolis force. M is the mass, which is mass of the Earth. Actually, it has a negative sign because this is not a positive force, but an inertial force. And omega is the angular velocity, and v is the tangential velocity. Even modern day physicists have a hard time explaining this formula. And the mathematics behind this formula is so complicated. You can look it up on the web. And this formula is also, they found that is applicable to predicting weather systems. That is why it has remained so popular. In US, high school students know about the Coriolis force, but unfortunately in India, it is not taught. Maybe it's because Coriolis force is not as significant in India as it is in US. I'll tell you why later. This is the basis of the Coriolis force. Earth, we would think that as a ball, everything rotates at the same velocity, but it is not true. If you think about it, in 24 hours, we cover more distance at the equator because the circumference is so high compared to the poles. So when you convert that into velocity, the velocity of space traveled at the equator is 1,040 miles per hour in space. Compared to the pole, North Pole, it is 0.00005 miles per hour. So if you go up and come down after an hour, if you launch from the equator, the miles away from where you launched it. Whereas if you did the same thing at the equator, North Pole, I mean, not the equator, North Pole, you would land essentially at the same place. That is the difference. Now, this is the Coriolis force. This is what he was describing. When the Earth rotates from west to east, so here in this direction, it generates the Coriolis force, which is perpendicular to the equator or the axis of rotation. And this is what it is. And what happens with that is at the equator, where the force starts, the force itself is zero. But by the time it reaches the poles, the force becomes very high. And the other thing that happens is because of the force, the inertial drag, it only affects things that are not rigidly attached to the Earth. An important example is air above the Earth. And second one is, if there's a plane flying, it is not attached, so the force would affect it. So a lot of pilots feel that they are going down because of force, and they try to bring their nose up, but it is actually the Coriolis force. Other one example would be a missile launched towards North Pole, or even a rifle bullet. I'll show you some examples of that. Other thing that happens is the Coriolis force pushes flying objects to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. So this was found out by actually Italian gunners who are using cannons. And and also the British and Germans, whenever they fought a war close to the poles, like the Falkland Islands, if you aim the cannon, it will actually go left of where you're aiming. And the reason is the Coriolis force. So here is an example. If the plane is flying right along the equator, it goes in a straight line. But if it's going at about right about where they're showing here is probably Detroit, then it will deviate a little bit to the right.
Manjunath, is this the reason why the sink drains in one direction in north and one direction in south?
I'm sorry. What is Sri Krishna? What was it?
The water drains in one direction in the north and another direction in the south. Is it because of this Coriolis force?
Ah, Sri Krishna,
the way water drains.
You are a mind reader. Can you wait just a few slides?
And it doesn't drain in India, right?
Theoretically, it should drain because we are still about 13 degrees in the northern hemisphere. Yeah. Sri Krishna knows everything. Yeah. That's why he's called Sri Krishna. Yeah. I'll come to that in a minute, Sri Krishna.
Okay,
yeah, thank you for that point. Here in the north, when you're in Canada, there's a much larger deviation of the plane because of the Coriolis force. So this is something I didn't know about. So it was very interesting for me to experience this. So what is the practical implication of that? And there at Inti Nyan Museum, they have a demonstration. Inti Nyan is, of course, at 0 degrees. So there's 0 Coriolis force. And this is our tour guide. And she showed us that you can balance a raw egg on a nail head here. It is important that it's a raw egg, not a boiled egg, because boiled egg, then it gets rigidly attached. But in a raw egg, the yolk is actually suspended. So it was subject to the Coriolis force. I mean, not Coriolis force, but if Coriolis force acts on it, that's why you are not able to balance, do this experiment in America or maybe even in India. But when the latitude is 0, 0, 0, this is within less than a minute, she was able to balance this raw egg on a nail head. And you get a certificate if you do that. And so a lot of visitors try that. I didn't try it. I didn't want to have egg on my face. But if you are near the pole, what happens? This is Lapua in Finland. And that is 63 degrees latitude. So it is very close to the Arctic Circle. If you are a championship marksman and you are participating in a rifle shooting competition in Lapua, then you switch this on in your, because it has the sight in Coriolis. Because otherwise, if you don't have this, you will aim at the target and your bullet will land on the right side of the target. So that is how important it is. Actually, it increases with the distance. So this is only 109 yards. People go to 1,000 yards, and there it becomes even more significant. So you have to take that into consideration along with your airspeed, moisture, everything. So that's what it takes to win an Olympic or international rifle championship. This is what Sri Krishna was talking about. They have this exhibition at Inti Nyan. They have put 2 basins like this, 10 feet north and south of the red line I showed you. They fill it with water and then they open the drain. So here, this one is going in this direction. It's emptying in this direction, like Sri Krishna was talking about. It is the anti-clockwise direction. They put the leaves to show, actually, it makes it tracking easier, but I had no difficulty photographing. And as you can see, the vortex here is anti-clockwise. So this is in the northern hemisphere. And this basin in the southern hemisphere, it goes in the opposite direction. It is a clockwise vortex when it drains. So in India, it is only 13 degrees. So it will be subtle. But if you're a physicist and make everything foolproof, like no vibration and control the temperature, everything. Probably you can demonstrate it. But it's very subtle. I think there were 2 scientific papers in Science describing this and proving that this really does happen. What is the importance of that? I mentioned weather and Coriolis force or Coriolis effect. This is what it is. In the northern hemispheres, when you may have a storm system, it is called a hurricane. So here is Hurricane Isabel, and the rotation here, it is around the low pressure point, is anti-clockwise. But the same storm system in the southern hemisphere is called a cyclone. That is the difference between what we see in the Indian Ocean, it's called a cyclone, and what we see in the Atlantic Ocean, which is a hurricane. So here, the rotation is clockwise. And that is because of Coriolis effect. So I will answer any questions about Coriolis effect to the best of my knowledge later, but time to move on to the volcanoes of Ecuador. And I mentioned the volcanoes because of another thing that we were talking about. It is the equatorial bulge. When the Earth starts rotating, this is easy for biochemists to understand because of the centrifugal force. So then most of the material migrates to the outer edges, which would be the equator. So the equator actually bulges, and that material comes from, of course, the poles. So the poles become flat. So if you're drilling a hole to the center of the Earth, this is just a theoretical aspect because the deepest hole is not even 5 miles. So if you're doing that, if you start out from the equator, you have to drill about close to 25 kilometers more because of the bulge. Whereas it is a much shorter distance, but the same amount at the poles. The poles also are flatter. So I mentioned the avenue of volcanoes. Quito and Cuenca are all along the same avenue, narrow corridor. On both sides, there are very high mountains, which are volcanoes, active volcanoes, because this is where the Pacific plate meets the Andes plate. From Quito, actually, you can see the volcanoes. The one you're seeing here, this is my picture, is Antizana, which is 18,714 feet. You can imagine in India, Annapurna is not Annapurna, but the tallest peak is around like 22,000, and here it is 18,714 feet. And you can, this is you can climb up to this, and there is snow there, and a lot of people do that. And right on the left side is Cayambe, 18,996. On the right side of Antizana is Cotopaxi, which is 19,347, and Chimborazo, 20,564. Cotopaxi erupted when the French expedition was going on twice, and they were able to document that. So these are not just inactive volcanoes. But the volcano that's closest to Quito, as I said, almost in its backyard, is Pichincha. And so in 2005, they built a cable car system to the base of Pichincha. So you can drive up to the base station of Teleferico, which is the cable car system, buy a ticket. And this one, the base itself is at 10,286 feet. And within 20 minutes, it reaches 13,000 feet. I wouldn't advise anyone to do this because I was stupid to do this and I got sick. There's an oxygen station at the top. Fortunately, I was able to hold off till I reached the airport where I threw up. Because I've gone up to 19,000 feet, trekked there, carrying my backpack, and nothing has happened. Here, the problem is you don't acclimatize. So if you are going to do this, go to Quito, wait for a few days, walk around, and then start climbing. When you reach the top, you can actually see the city of Quito right there. And this is Pichincha. There are twin peaks of Pichincha. And the road here is a nicely paved track. It takes about 3 hours from the Teleferico station of trekking, and it goes through here, here, and finally you reach the crater. So that is at 15,000 feet. And when you look towards Quito, there's also a sign that says in Spanish, Mirador de los Volcanes. This is the avenue of volcanoes, and they list all the top volcanoes. There are many more which are smaller, but these are the big ones. The ones I mentioned: Cayambe, Antizana, Cotopaxi, and so there's Chimborazo is on this side, and you can actually see them. So all the civilization is here. There's even a major highway that runs through this corridor, and which is, there are many, many earthquakes almost on a daily basis, and all these volcanoes are like fuses that are ready to go off, and they're very, very tall, and people climb them, and most of them have snow or ice at the very top. This is Chimborazo. This is not my picture. This is the only photograph that in this presentation, which is not mine. I mentioned Chimborazo for a reason. This is 20,564 feet tall. And if you take measurements from the sea level, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on the planet. Chimborazo is right here, 62, 63 meters. But if you take a measurement from the center of the Earth, Chimborazo is the tallest point on Earth because of the equatorial bulge, because it adds another 21 kilometers to the height. And Mount Everest is way down here. Now, getting back to our original plan of searching for the Draculas, these orchids are also commonly known as monkey face orchids. So I traveled to Cuenca, which is a very beautiful city. I had not seen any city which was that clean, that beautiful. So it was really a pleasure to visit that place. This is how Cuenca is. It's a small place, and there are mountains everywhere. And in the center, there's a huge church which was built by the Spanish. And it has blue tiles on the domes, and these tiles are from the Republic of Czechoslovakia. This is the hotel where I stayed, and the roads were very, very clean, and there were flowers everywhere. So I said, wow, okay, this is where I'm going to find my orchid. And this is the peak hour on the main street, hardly any traffic. And off-peak hours, this is downtown or central part of the city, nothing. So beautiful. People were just sitting there, and I said, wow, this is where one can meditate because there's no noise here. And close to the church, there were many flower shops. And this is a native woman, and who was very happy to pose for me. But the problem was all these flowers were regular flowers, that nothing exotic. So I was looking through all these shops, and I could only spot two orchids. This is one, and this is the other one. All others are fairly common. I don't have to go to Ecuador to see these plants. I like this money plant, pothos, you see everywhere, the roses. So I was kind of disappointed. So then I had plan B, which was to visit a national park, which is right here. This is Cuenca, and this is the Parque Nacional Cajas in Spanish. That is the Cajas National Park. So that's at about 10,000 feet. So I thought, surely, if you go there, you're going to find orchids. And I took a bus. I traveled to Cajas National Park, and this was the scene. Very beautiful, very cloudy, and this is something that you would see in the Himalayas or even in Ooty, but mostly grass. Nothing, no hanging Draculas anywhere. And it was cold, very cold, because this is at 10,000 feet. So I was kind of disappointed. So this is the type of grass that grows there. It's called the switchback grass. It became obvious that the orchids were hiding somewhere in the deep jungles around these mountains, and I had no way of getting there. So I came back kind of disappointed. And this is the bus I took to go to Cajas National Park. I show this for a reason. You see this advertisement here, Homero Ortega, and that is a company which is very famous worldwide because they make these straw hats. And I visited their factory in Cuenca. This woman is wearing one such hat. These are very expensive hats, so that's why I didn't buy them. They cost about $60 each. And moreover, I already look like a Mexican, and if I wear that hat, my neighbors will ask me to mow their lawns. So that's a risk you take.
That is a racist comment, man.
Yeah. So the fibers they use are natural fibers. They are from a palm tree that grows in Ecuador. So they're very stable, and you can wear these hats almost a lifetime without breaking down. But $60 is a lot for a straw hat. So I had plan C. This was my last attempt, which was to visit a place which is about 35 kilometers from Cuenca called Gualaseyo. Gualaseyo is at 8,000 feet. It is, so I rented or hired a car and to go there. This is the headquarters of a world famous orchid growing company called Ecuador. This is the headquarters of Ecuador. Arcadias del Ecuador this is the front office. It was not much to look at, a small window and a door. I thought, well, is it really the place I'm looking for? But once I got inside, the place was huge. And you see me smiling here for the first time because, there were orchids everywhere. See this place here in the, it open exhibit. I'll show you a close-up. These are all orchids. They're growing naturally. And this is just the water dripping to maintain the humidity. So I was like a little boy running around, with toys surrounding me. And here it is very visitor friendly. You can buy a ticket and you can get a guided tour of the place. And there were no tourists, so I was all by myself. They assigned a guide to me. And once we started talking botany, he said, whatever you want to do, you know what you're doing. So he even took me to some of the places I don't think visitors are allowed. And I spent almost like an hour photographing many, many types of orchids. Even on the doors, there were orchids. So, this was like heaven on earth for me. So on the walls, they had put up some posters explaining how the orchids are developed here and marketed. It starts out with the mother plant area. So this is the area that most people are not allowed, but they gave me permission to go in there and to photograph. So the pollination is done manually, and they sometimes hybridize different species to get hybrid orchids of different colors or even different textures. And then they allow these capsules to mature. And these capsules have thousands and thousands of very miniature microscopic seeds. So then they harvest these capsules and grow these seeds in tissue culture media in vitro. in petri dishes, and sterility is maintained almost like a lab. From there, these things grow, and they take out chunks of these growths or germinating seedlings, and they put them in flasks. So this is just to dilute out the population, and they grow some more in these flasks. So then they take out the individual plants and plant them in a tray which has natural fibers. So this is the first time they come out of seclusion, and they get hardened, and also they start fighting diseases. And so when that is done, then it is transferred to the individual parts, which are very tiny parts, plastic parts, and they grow them in bulk. So this is what is finally marketed in the US or all over the world as individual orchid plants. The whole process takes about 3 years from pollination. That's how slow it is. That's why orchids are so expensive. And also they had list of plants that they had crossbred, like Oncidium and Oncidium intraspecies, Lycaste, and Odontoglossum, and Phragmipedium. I have some closely related species I'll show you, and also Maxillaria with Cryptochilum, and they develop different species. I was thinking this is something India can do, because in India there are many places, especially in the north, like the Valley of Flowers, where something like this can be done. But I don't know if they're going to find a market for these flowers in India. They may have to export it. But India definitely has
Arunachal Pradesh is famous for orchids, and there's a beautiful orchid park in Kaziranga, Assam.
Yeah, but we don't, on the world market, I don't know if they are competing.
No, Arunachal Pradesh has to be taken over by China for that to happen.
Yeah.
We can only put a saffron flag there. That's all.
Yeah. No, there is another marketing idea I'll share with you later. Actually, I was able to see the actual demonstrations here where they were being grown. And like here, all that was shown on those posters, these are real plants, different species growing there. And it is not just one or two. I mean, they have literally thousands and thousands. So each bottle contains maybe about 20 to 50 orchids. So you can imagine the scale of this production.
CK, they looks like they are sealed. Where do they get the oxygen and the carbon dioxide exchange?
No, they're not sealed. They have some openings, because at this stage, they're and also no, what they do is sometimes they manually open them and close them.
Okay.
It is very labor intensive, but these places are, you don't get fungal spores or infections because they make sure of that the airflow is good, and also the lighting comes from these fluorescent bulbs. I'll show you why this is important, and also each one is labeled when it was started. So it is very scientific production line here.
CK, one quick question. Are these inbreds that they are using for propagation, or are they still segregating lines that they use for hybrids?
No, the lines are well-established lines. So they're not, there are only a few things that are being crossbred because most of them may not even survive. So I have bought some plants from them. They try to crossbreed Phalaenopsis with another one, and I was not happy with, and they didn't survive one generation. So they were more like annuals. Orchids are a very old type of plant, and they're epiphytic. And so it is very difficult to manipulate them. They have a mind of their own. They're not, and also if it takes 3 years, you had to just do a whole bunch of, it's almost like doing lab work at IISc. You do the experiment and then go to your Raghavendra Swami temple or Hanuman temple and you pray and pray and pray, and then finally you get the result. So if it's good, it's okay. If not, you start all over again. So it is not a short-lived plant. The varieties you get are limited. And if it's a hybrid between two, like a Miltoniopsis and something else, I definitely wouldn't buy them because they would be genetically unstable. Orchids, in fact, there are over 1,000 genera of orchids, and they grow pretty much on every continent except Antarctica. So they're well adapted. Even then, because of their epiphytic nature, they're very fragile. I don't know if it answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And they are self-pollinating, or you said that it actually requires labor to pollinate these things.
They are not self-pollinating, but I'll show you later some pictures. They have an extremely complicated mechanism for pollination, which is most amazing among all the plants, because they use insects, only certain types of insects, and how those insects move along the flower, and in the process pollinate. It is truly fascinating.
Got it.
So this is a whole bunch of things which are ready to be transferred to one of these.
There is no self-pollination.
There is self-pollination, Professor GP, but that is only in the wild. Unless somebody, because I think that's how they survive as a species. But sometimes there are, it is almost like an inflorescence. There are a whole bunch of flowers growing together. So there may be cross-pollination between plants, but it's almost like a community of orchids in the same place.
But I think their flower structure is such that pulse pollination is a lot difficult. I think, for example, in a vanilla, which is commercial crop, it all has to be manually pollinated. So the stamen and the whatever that ovary, they are two separate and they bloom at different times, something like that. I don't know the details.
Yes. That's why I said, answering Kishore's question, I'll show you later how what you're talking about, where it forces the insect to move from one area to the other. But that doesn't stop it from self-pollinating. But the closeness of many plants in the same area encourages cross-pollination using insects as vectors. So here, this is how they get ready to market. This is a piece of cork, which actually is a bark from a tree that grows mostly in Portugal. And here is a plant that they just took out and they wrap it in sphagnum moss to maintain the moisture and also the little bit of acidity. And so then they just wrap it with a string and it's ready. It'll expose it to light and give some moisture and it'll start growing. So by this time, I don't know what the survival rate is, but at least these plants are hardy enough to grow. And then this was the area I was allowed to see. This is the mother plant area, where they have a whole variety of orchids growing very naturally. There is some water there and subdued lighting, everything, and temperature is controlled, humidity is controlled. I'm sure they also look out for any fungal diseases. So this is almost like paradise on earth. So this is where I spent almost an hour.
They don't look like epiphytic growth here. But CK, looks like they are growing on the soil.
No, they're not growing on the soil. They are actually growing in small pots like this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is an artificial area.
Okay.
This is not a natural area, because this is a controlled condition where they're maintaining the mother plants from which they can harvest the capsules.
Okay.
So the crossbreeding really doesn't happen by itself, so they really don't worry about it. Like this, this is Phalaenopsis. So beautiful, I could have spent the whole day here, but I was still thinking, where is my monkey face orchid? And finally, in one small area, I spotted it. And I said, wow, this is what I came for. And as you can, to answer a question, CS, you see this here, how the plant parts are. So it almost looks like this tree is the epiphytic support, but it is not. It's like they're actually in plants. That's how they're able to control the growth. This is the plant I was looking for. This is Dracula. I think it is IISc AANA. And it almost looks like a little monkey, the two eyes. And this is Dracula erythrochaete. This is Dracula hirsuta.
And what are those eye-like structures and the rest of the structures are for? What roles do they play?
These are pigmentations, and this is let me there's a breakdown. I can send you a dissected flower and what the parts are, because it's a very complex system where the ovaries are, I think, down here, and the insect has to get up here and move around. And this is actually not there, but it's here. This is the ovary. And so they have to go through this and pick up the pollen and then eventually go there.
Got it.
Right there. This is much easier to see. This is, I think this is not Vampira. I think this is Simia, Dracula Simia. And see, that's where they need to go. And they have to go through all these areas and pick up the pollen and then finally reach there. So, I mean, that depends on each type of orchid. But in this particular orchid, that's the way it is. And most of the orchid flowers hang down, facing down. So that makes it a little difficult for the insects to climb up, because they had to first climb down, get the footing, and then go up. So these little, they take these little steps. So if this were to be growing in India, of course, they would build temples. So this is Hanuman flower. So it will become very famous. To answer Sri Krishna's question, you don't have to, China doesn't have to take over Arunachal. All they have to do is grow one plant like this. This is Dracula Vampira. You can see the beautiful color pattern. And it attracts, if you follow Darwin's hypothesis, there will be a very specific moth or insect that pollinates these. And that is what all this structure is geared for. And sure enough, there are some insects which are going to pollinate just these types of orchids. This is another Dracula Vampira. So I had my heart's content full with these orchids. And also, how do I know all these names? Because I bought this book at the bookstore of Ecuador that collaborated with the local university to bring this out. This is both in Spanish and in English. These are the Draculas of Ecuador. So very unique plants to Ecuador. And after I got back from the trip, I made my own photo book, which is what I usually do, of all the orchids that I saw there and photographed, and try to learn their names. So these were orchids of Gualaceo, Ecuador, and that was in July 2019. So this was the end of a trip. Or was it the beginning of a journey? Answer is, it was beginning of a journey. Because remember, this was 2019, before the pandemic began, and I wanted to have my own orchidarium. So I could not get rid of that thought. So I ended up building an orchidarium. I got a contractor to build this, and you can see some of the orchids like Phalaenopsis inside. And I've sent pictures of my orchids to my friends. I shared with them anytime they flower. And inside, I was able to build this based on what I saw at Ecuador. These things I bought from Home Depot, and I put a temperature gauge and also humidity gauge. And now I have more than 100 orchids. It was a steep learning curve. There were many technical issues that needed to be solved. Biggest one was how to balance humidity with low temperatures, because that happens naturally in the Andes Mountains where there are clouds coming in, or in California where the ocean temperatures are low, or in Oregon or Seattle, or even on the East Coast. But in the hot Dallas weather, where the temperatures go from 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is below freezing, to 105 degrees, which is almost boiling point type for us, it is very difficult to maintain a very steady temperature for these orchids. But I think I've succeeded, because they're not only growing well, but also flowering. These are the flowers you can see, and I'll show you some live plants after this. And I've been able to grow many of these plants. These are the Miltoniopsis, and also this is what I'm going to show you. This is called the ladies.
Picture plant, isn't it?
No. This is. It'll come back to me. So ladies' shoe. It is also called. Well, I'll get back to it in a minute.
So one quick question on that. Do you vary the soil that you grow these things in, or do you actually have one common type of soil and they all either grow or they don't make it, and therefore you move on?
There are that is part of the learning process. The wood chips are what are commonly used. These are from New Zealand, pine barks. They actually support the plants. That way, the plants are different because they come from different areas of the world. There are even terrestrial orchids. I have one outside which does really well in the soil. Then you have to bring it in when it gets very cold. But here, you need aeration. You also need humidity, and occasionally you need a little bit of nutrition for these plants. And also ionic strength of the medium is very important. Lighting is different. The lighting requirement depends on the species. So you cannot make it. You can make it too bright or too dark, and they will die. What I have done is I'm not growing all varieties of orchids like a botany department. I have picked only ones that produce beautiful flowers, very complex flowers, either three-dimensionally or the patterns that you see here, and also that are a little hardy. I actually, before I buy anything, I look at the specs on that. And if I don't like it, if it's too picky, then I don't even buy it. So that's the strategy I've used. Like some of them, like dendrobiums, are very easy. Phalaenopsis is very easy to maintain. Others are not so easy. So those I don't even bother, because why just kill them?
CK, this part, do they have soil at all? I don't think they have soil.
No. You cannot put soil.
Yeah, so it's all bunk.
Because soil, you're asking for fungal infections. And also soil gets compacted. So these are all wood chips.
Wood chips.
Yeah. So wood chips.
So there is no sawdust? There is no sawdust in these things?
No.
Not even sawdust.
Because the roots need the air around them. And some of the roots are actually green and they photosynthesize, like Phalaenopsis. So you cannot even use this type of pot for Phalaenopsis. Phalaenopsis roots go out, and if you look at them, they are actually photosynthesizing. Like I said, each orchid has its own requirements. And if you're able to meet those requirements, I mean, they are like a treasure. I'll show you some. So even this is the hybridization part I was talking about. When you cross hybridize, you get all these patterns and different colors. So you generate all this, and some of them are very fragrant. This one I showed you, and this is my favorite. This one looks like a little Spanish dancer with her skirt and all the colorful, and even lipstick and 2 eyes and her hair. So just beautiful. Again, you see how complicated the structure is, where the ovary is, and where the pollen had to go up. And so these are all the things that prevent cross-pollination. So it is very hard to grow these plants using seeds. Their only way is to tissue culture after pollination, like what they do at CK AANA. So most of the times I use them just if there's a branch that I can cut off from the rhizome, I try to grow a new plant, but it's not easy. And they also have pseudo bulbs where they store water. So even overwatering or underwatering can kill them. And look at these flowers. These are little clones. This one even has a little bindi and also smiling. You know, when you look at these flowers, say, wow, it is well worth it. Look at the 2 eyes here, and it is not random pattern. Like this is not like the jumping genes. They are propagated. I mean, they're passed on from one plant to the next generation. Every time it flowers, it will have almost the same identical pattern, not like the Barbara McClintock type of experiment. So these are the ones I was telling you about, pediophilum, which is the lady's sandal. So it is almost like a shoe that you can wear. And here is the ovary. And then here you got all the pollen. And then the insect has to go down to get the whatever the nectar that is producing, climb up and go here. And when they get out, it pollinates. And really marvelous structures when they unfold 3-dimensionally. This is Phalaenopsis. Look at the pattern here, and it is so different here. This one is a very popular hybrid because these flowers, I've shown CS, some of these, they last 4 to 5 months. So just like that, they stay there. I don't know whether they're waiting for pollination or whatever, but they're also thick and velvety. So it is like once they bloom, you're set for the next 4 to 5 months. Some of them are beautiful patterns like this, like a lace. These are all, by the way, from my orchidarium. This one is Zygonesia cyanosuare. This looks like a little bird flying. This is another flower, beautiful vein patterns and color. And again, you see how complicated the flower structure is and where the ovary is and where the pollen are produced. So very specific for certain insects. This is a dendrobium, which is very easy, again, to grow. This one is Maxillaria. And Maxillaria, this flower smells like fresh coconut. And there's a grass-like structure. These two are the Draculas. This is Dracula lotax from, lotax means clown, from Ecuador. And this is Dracula erythrochete, and you can see the flower stalk coming out. This is a very recent picture. And Draculas have flowered in my orchidarium. This is Dracula lotax with its 2 beady eyes and a nose. And the ovaries here. And this is Dracula vampira. But this one became an annual after it flowered and it died. This one is, I still have, this is the same plant that is still growing. So that is the end of the session here, the slide session. And I have few plants, live plants I want to show you.
CK, your trip to Ecuador, you organized it yourself? I missed the beginning of your talk. You may have covered it.
Yeah, I just went by myself because usually I don't take anyone with me on these trips because I don't know what to expect. There may be food or no food, and definitely not the spouse. Because this is almost like a scientific expedition for me, and I had to do a lot of planning because just seeing the plant is not good enough. You want to see the plant when it is flowering. So I had to look it up and what season it was going to flower, and so and with all that, and going to South America is not the safest trip. With all that, it turned out to be a very successful trip.
So you had done a lot of research before you embark on this journey. Looks
yes,
like.
Yes, that's true of wherever I've gone, whether it's Mount Kailash or Mount Everest, because you have to plan your trip very carefully. Because if you forget even your batteries for your cameras, you cannot come back because it won't be available, and you will come back empty-handed. So I plan everything beforehand and pack all my bags and everything, what I can carry, what I'm supposed to, like weather and any medications you need. You have to be prepared for everything. So yeah, these do take a lot of planning.
It helps that you are a doctor, Manju.
In some ways, yes, because these are not these are very civilized places, but still, yes, because you do pack certain things because of the food. You don't want to get what we call Montezuma's revenge, diarrhea from these tropical places, and also if you're going to some of these mountains. You better be prepared for mountain sickness or wild insects. That's why I have not visited the Amazonian basin because I just don't want to get exposed to some of those insects. I did visit Galapagos. I couldn't show you because of lack of time. That will be a totally separate.
I wanted to do that.
Yeah, that's a completely separate presentation. And I spent 18,000 rupees in Bangalore getting just a book made because I had so many pictures from Galapagos. If you have not done it, you must visit Galapagos. It's well worth it. So let me.
So one quick question on that. What time of the year do you recommend that people go to Galapagos versus Ecuador? And then the other related question is, do the orchids on the islands, do they grow, and how different are they from the ones that you see in the mountains?
There were no orchids in Galapagos.
Got it.
Galapagos is a totally different environment. First of all, it's at the sea level, and you have volcanoes, but when you go up the volcano, there's hardly any water there. So Galapagos is a totally different beast. I went in July and August. August, I went to Galapagos because July I went Ecuador, like Quito and Cuenca. That was the best month. And from what I had read, because no point in going in winter if they are not blooming. Galapagos, probably you can go year round. I was going more towards September because these are on the equator, so your season really doesn't matter. The sun will be beating down all the time, whether there's no winter, there are no seasons since it's on the equator.
It's more about the wind patterns of the ocean. Apparently, the sea can be very choppy in January, February, when most people go. That's what I had read. That's why I was curious.
Most people go. Let me turn this off. Can you still see me?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, most people go as tourists. They go on these cruises, and they go on the ships. And if I make a presentation, I'll show you what it looks like if you're planning to go. From there, they take these boats to the islands. So there, the choppiness may come into play. What I did was I flew directly to Galapagos, and then put on my backpack, and then I stayed there for a week, went to all the places, and whatever I wanted to see, because what I want to see is different from what other people want to see. I'm not interested in local restaurants or tasting the local dish or anything like that. I am looking for certain things that interest me. It may be wild animals or plants, things like that, and I want to look at their behavior, because if you permit me to say this, one big question I have is that interests me is universal consciousness. How do animals and plants communicate with each other and across the genera and even across the kingdoms non-verbally? We always, as biochemists, think that, it is the chemoreceptors, blah, blah, blah. That is not the complete answer. I got some proof for that. But how you can communicate with other animals without saying a word, because they don't understand what you're saying. How can you communicate?
CK, there are at least 4 methods of communication, and verbal is the least
effective. Yes, sir. Agree.
Other 3 are very, very different. How did Mauna, propagate truth? Like that, then if you read those texts, you will see there are 4 methods of communication. And this verbal is the lowest in that order.
True. Yes, sir. Yeah, because that is said in Dikshitar Kruti, Paradi Chatvari Vagatmakam. That's how he describes Ganapati. Para, Vaikari, Madhyama, and Pashyanti. So those are the 4 ways of communicating. Right. And so you can communicate with across the species using those means. And that is what I am interested in. So I'm always looking for behavior and see how I can communicate with a wild animal without using any verbal means, because anyway, I have done that experiment with, it was very interesting results. I can say that.
The semiochemicals in the insect arena are getting great recognition at this point of time. Although the pheromones themselves were discovered about 60 years ago, we are now beginning to probe the area of semiochemicals, the way insects decide where the plants are, which plants are the attractive hosts, which ones aren't. This is not done through visualization, touching and feeling. They actually recognize it from several feet, sometimes several miles away from where the food is. So the communication aspects of what you're describing, that consciousness, that ability to smell and sense things, I don't think we have even addressed a small part of it because of the distraction that the verbal communications create.
Yes, absolutely. Because, there is the concept of interaction is changing. The one big example is the force. When we studied force in physics in PUC, it was the Newtonian force. That was the concept. Now, the modern physics says force is an interchange of particles. So we have not applied that principle to biology. So there is a constant interchange of particles between the plant and the pollinator. And many of these particles or forces that are interchanged, we don't even feel them, or we have no way of quantitating. For example, gravity. Graviton is the particle that's exchanged between, say, Jupiter and Earth. and sun and us, but we have no way of figuring out what it looks like, what its nature is, or even, how it works. We only have some idea about electrostatic forces. Like I said, even gravitational force is the lowest, like Professor GP said, verbal communication is on the lowest order of communication. Gravitational force is the lowest order of force in terms of intensity and strength. We don't even understand gravity because we have not understood gravitons. So anyway, I want to quickly show you the plants. This one is the lady's foot. You can probably see what it looks like, and it is growing here. This is Miltoniopsis. By the way, that was Paphiopedilum barbatum. This is Miltoniopsis, and you can see how complicated the flower is, how large the flower is.
This is the ballerina.
I'm sorry?
This is the ballerina.
This is yeah, this is almost the ballerina. Yeah, this is her. You can actually see the ballerina right in the center. And this is also a Miltoniopsis, but you can see the color.
Right.
And how you can manipulate to see the pattern. I hope you can see the pattern there and the ballerina there, but now she's wearing a different skirt of a different color. And so most genetically most amazing if thousands of people can get PhDs if they figure out where these jumping genes are, or the plasmid elements, extra chromosomal elements are. A really fascinating world of orchids. So I thank you very much for your patient.
Wonderful.
CK, thanks a lot for that interesting journey that you shared with us. Yeah. Very interesting, very informative as well. Some of us have no clue of all this orchid world. Although you have introduced to some of us, GT, myself, YP, all your beautiful orchids blooming.
Yeah,
yes, right. They are just a joy to watch them, even in a picture. But I can imagine in reality, staying close by, it will be really, amazing.
Yeah, I can, one of them is fragrant. I'm smelling the fragrance sitting here. Unfortunately, I cannot share it with you.
Pretty soon we'll have.
CK, in your own words, this is so good.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is so good.
It's a great talk, CK.
Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you.
It was a wonderful talk, CK. We enjoyed very much.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating talk.
Fascinating, and I've stopped
Okay.
recording now. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.